In today's video, we delve into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in the Pacific Northwest, the series of unsolved serial killings that plagued the Lewis-Clark Valley between 1979 and 1982. Over a span of just a few years, several victims, including young girls and young adults, vanished without a trace or were discovered dead under eerily mysterious circumstances. These cases have haunted the local communities of Lewiston, Idaho, and Clarkston, Washington for decades, leaving behind not only a trail of unanswered questions, but also a sense of fear that still lingers today. The victims, who were mostly in their teens and early 20s, seemed to disappear without warning, their bodies often found in remote or secluded areas, showing signs of brutal violence but no clear connection between the crimes. As investigators tried to piece together the clues, they found themselves stumped by the lack of solid evidence. Despite numerous theories and potential suspects over the years, no one has ever been brought to justice for these heinous crimes. In this video, we will explore the chilling details of these unsolved murders, discuss the key theories that have emerged over the years, and examine why the mystery of the Lewis-Clark Valley killings continues to captivate both local residents and true crime enthusiasts around the world. The story begins in 1979, when 12-year-old Mai went missing during the Asotin County Fair in Asotin, Washington. A lively young girl, known for her enthusiasm and friendly nature, Mai's sudden disappearance would mark the beginning of a string of mysterious cases in the Lewis-Clark Valley. On the evening she vanished, Mai was attending the local fair with friends, but when it was time to meet up with her family, she was nowhere to be found. Despite immediate search efforts by both locals and law enforcement, there was no sign of Mai. The only clue that emerged was a disturbing one: her schoolwork, abandoned at the scene, left behind as if she'd been taken away suddenly. Over the years, multiple investigations into her disappearance have yielded little to no progress. Mai's case remains one of the most unsettling and unresolved parts of this terrifying chapter in the valley's history. As time passed, the community became increasingly desperate for answers, but Mai's whereabouts and the truth behind her disappearance continue to elude authorities. Her case remains a haunting reminder of how quickly a life can be taken, leaving only unanswered questions in its wake. The disappearances of Christina, Brandi, and Stephen. In 1982, the unsettling pattern of disappearances continued when Christina Nguyen, her stepsister Brandi Parker, and their co-worker, Stephen Lee, vanished after finishing their shifts at the Lewiston Civic Center in Lewiston, Idaho. The three were last seen leaving their jobs together, but they never made it home. Their sudden disappearance sparked widespread fear and confusion. Searches were launched immediately, but for weeks there was no sign of the missing trio. It wasn't until later that their remains were discovered in a remote area, far from where they were last seen. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, as it seemed to tie their deaths to the growing list of unsolved murders in the region. The case became even more complex when authorities began to speculate that Stephen Lee might not have been the intended victim at all. Some believe that he was an unfortunate bystander who was caught up in the same violent wave that claimed the lives of Christina and Brandi. However, without any concrete evidence or a suspect to focus on, the case remains a tragic and unresolved mystery. The disappearances of Christina, Brandi, and Stephen serve as a haunting reminder of the danger that lurked in the Lewis-Clark Valley during that period, as well as the cruel reality that some killers may not have a clear pattern or motive, making it even harder to bring justice to the victims and their families. Possible link between victims. As the number of unsolved cases continued to grow in the Lewis-Clark Valley, investigators and the local community began to notice a disturbing pattern. The series of disappearances and murders, spanning from 1979 to 1982, seemed too similar to be random acts of violence. While each case had its own set of unique details, there were enough commonalities to suggest that the same person might have been responsible for all these crimes. Victims like Mai, Zane, Christina, Brandi, and Stephen were often young and relatively vulnerable, with many of them disappearing under mysterious circumstances and showing signs of brutal violence upon discovery. The lack of clear motives, as well as the sporadic nature of the crimes, pointed to a possible serial killer who had been operating in the area, perhaps for years, without being caught. A theory began to emerge that the killer was someone familiar with the area, using the dense, isolated landscapes of the valley to hide their tracks. Law enforcement started to investigate possible links between the victims, speculating that the killer may have been targeting certain individuals, but also seizing opportunities when they arose. However, despite this theory gaining traction, no definitive evidence ever emerged to confirm that these cases were indeed connected, or that one person was responsible for them all. The idea of a serial killer stalking the Lewis Clark Valley brought a sense of heightened fear and anxiety to the region. The community, already reeling from the deaths, was now gripped by the terrifying thought that a killer could be lurking in plain sight, hiding in the shadows of everyday life. But even after decades of investigation, the connection between the victims remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case, as the mystery persists without answers. In 1995, investigators began to focus their attention on a man named Zane, a figure who had long been part of the investigation's peripheral circle. Zane's name was linked to several of the victims in the Lewis Clark Valley murders, and over time it became clear that he might have more involvement in the cases than originally thought. Zane had connections to each of the victims, either through friendships, acquaintances, or indirect associations. He had been questioned multiple times by authorities during the course of the investigations, but no conclusive evidence ever tied him directly to any of the crimes. Still, his behavior and history raised suspicions that couldn't be ignored. Zane's past was troubling. In addition to his known links to the victims, he had been arrested in the past for trespassing in a mortuary, a fact that further added to his sinister reputation. The circumstances surrounding this arrest were murky, but it only fueled the theory that Zane might have had a morbid fascination with death, or even been involved in other unsolved cases in the region. Some even speculated that his actions might have been a sign of deeper, darker tendencies. Despite his troubled history and the mounting suspicion, Zane was never officially charged or arrested for any of the murders. The lack of hard evidence left authorities unable to make an arrest, and the case continued to frustrate both investigators and the grieving families of the victims. Zane remains a figure of mystery in this ongoing investigation, and whether he was truly involved in the killings or simply a red herring remains a subject of debate. His story, and the unanswered questions surrounding his potential involvement, adds yet another layer of complexity to an already chilling set of crimes. The search for the truth continues, and Zane's potential role in the murders still lingers in the minds of those who seek justice for the victims. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence that seemed to suggest Zane's involvement in the murders, investigators were never able to find definitive proof that directly linked him to the crimes. His connections to the victims, his troubling past, and his repeated questioning by law enforcement all pointed to him as a potential suspect. However, the absence of concrete evidence left a critical gap in the case, and as a result, speculation surrounding his guilt continued for years. The circumstantial evidence against Zane was compelling, yet it was never enough to bring formal charges. He had been in close proximity to the victims in the weeks and months leading up to their disappearances, and his history of suspicious behavior made him an easy target for investigators. But there were no DNA matches, no physical evidence at the crime scenes, and no clear motive that could tie him to the murders with certainty. This lack of solid evidence meant that Zane was never formally charged with the crimes, leaving a cloud of uncertainty over his potential involvement. While some continue to believe he may have been responsible, others argue that he was a convenient suspect whose connections and background simply made him an easy target for investigators eager to solve the case. Over time, the case against Zane became one of the most significant what-ifs in the investigation. His troubled past and his odd behavior left many questions unanswered, but without proof, the mystery surrounding his potential role in the killings remains unresolved. The search for justice for the victims of the Lewis Clark Valley continues, but Zane's involvement, whether real or imagined, remains an enduring piece of the puzzle that has yet to be solved. Despite years of investigation, the case remains one of the most haunting and unresolved mysteries in the Pacific Northwest. The bodies of several victims, including Mai and Stephen, have never been found, leaving their families and the community in a state of perpetual uncertainty. These disappearances and brutal murders have left behind a trail of unanswered questions, and despite numerous efforts to uncover the truth, the killer or killers have never been definitively identified. Even with advances in forensic technology over the years, the case has stubbornly resisted resolution. DNA analysis, improved investigative methods, and new forensic tools have been employed in an attempt to connect the dots, but no direct evidence has ever been uncovered that links any particular person, whether Zane or someone else, to the crimes. The lack of physical evidence, combined with the mystery surrounding the victims' last moments, has made it nearly impossible for investigators to make any solid breakthroughs. For the families of Mai, Stephen, and the other victims, the pain of not knowing what happened to their loved ones is an ongoing struggle. The fact that so many pieces of the puzzle remain missing, such as the locations of certain bodies and the identity of the killer, has made closure almost impossible. While the passage of time may have dimmed the intensity of media coverage, the case still lingers in the hearts and minds of those who remember the victims, and the terror that gripped the region during the early 1980s. The mystery remains unresolved, leaving both the community and law enforcement searching for answers that continue to elude them. For law enforcement, the investigation into the unsolved murders in the Lewis-Clark Valley has been a particularly vexing and frustrating challenge. Investigators have long held a strong suspicion about the potential involvement of a man like Zane, yet the lack of conclusive proof has made it nearly impossible to bring him or anyone else to justice. The case has been a relentless pursuit of leads that seem to go nowhere, a cycle of questioning and re-questioning suspects, and a never-ending search for that one crucial piece of evidence that could tie everything together. Investigators have scoured the crime scenes, revisited old evidence with fresh eyes, and even relied on modern forensic technology to uncover new clues. Yet, each time they thought they were getting closer to an answer, the case seemed to slip further away, leaving them feeling like they were chasing shadows. The frustration of working on a case where the evidence is so circumstantial, where the connections are there but the proof is not, has taken its toll on law enforcement. The lingering questions: did Zane commit these crimes? Were the victims all linked to the same killer? Have haunted the officers involved, especially as years passed and new leads failed to materialize. They know they're close, but they've never been able to crack the case wide open. What adds to the difficulty is the emotional weight of the case. The victims' families, still waiting for justice and closure, rely on law enforcement to provide the answers that have remained elusive for decades. This pressure can be overwhelming, and the more time that passes, the harder it becomes to maintain hope that the case will ever be solved. Ultimately, the unresolved nature of these crimes has left law enforcement in a state of limbo, suspicious yet unable to act, determined, but without the clear evidence they need to bring the killer to justice. The case remains one of the most frustrating in the history of local law enforcement, as they continue to search for answers that may never come.